Hi guys, it's Sophie. So I thought I would do my May book wrap up outside today as it's such lovely weather. The lighting's kind of odd, I'm under the tree so it's still shady, so that I can actually see you. And I'm so sticky because I'm covered in sunscreen. But I have so many books to show you, so just as a warning, it's probably going to be a long one. Maybe get an iced coffee or something to help you through it. But yeah, I have read, let's count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 books. Nearly all of them hardcovers, so let's get into the books. So the first one I have is Minor Detail by Adiana Shibley, and this was a very interesting little story. I actually really enjoyed this one. We follow a man who is Palestinian, and he is trying to figure out what's happened to this one woman who is a victim of sort of war. She was sexually abused. She was basically kind of one of the Bedouin people who were kind of wandering around living their life, who got captured as they thought that they were like a combatant, and she is abused in this sort of camp. So we follow half the story, we follow her story. In the other half of the story we find this man in modern day Palestine who's trying to find out what's happened to her and why there's no record, even though there's like stories about her, actually what happened. And yeah, it was so compelling. It's a very short book, it's probably 200 pages, not even that, it's 112 pages. I always do that, I think 200 is way more than it is. But yeah, I really enjoyed this. I felt very like uneasy reading it because it felt so close, and I can definitely see why this one was on the international booker list. If you haven't read this one, I think other ones have maybe got a bit more hype. I really enjoyed this, so that's Minor Detail. Then the next one I have is The Last House on Needless Street by Catriona Ward. This is the first thriller I've read in a really long time. As I said, I've not really read that many thrillers. I have got another thriller in this one to talk about as well. But The Last House on Needless Street is a book which is very confusing, and it's quite hard to speak too much about it. However, in very brief, just so that you have some sense of the story, because I think loads of people have just said, oh, you don't know what to expect, just go in and do that, you know, if you want to do that, do that. However, basically it's about a man who maybe has a little girl that he has stolen in his house. We also have a perspective from his cat, and from a woman who believes that the little girl that might be there is her sister, and we kind of uncover the secrets of this. I am going to give a spoiler, like end of book spoiler. So if you don't want to listen to that, literally give me like 10 seconds. Let's say 10 seconds to be safe. However, this is about DID. So it's one of those things. I think it's a more sympathetic portrayal, but it's a bit of a stereotypical ending. Okay, we're safe again, we've finished. That was The Last House on Needless Street. We've got a few non-fictions left. The pile's just kind of random because there's a few of them. I read Gargoyle by Harriet Mercer, and I really enjoyed this book. I know that Jen's spoken about this on her channel, and I think Let's Talk About Books Baby is spoken about on her channel too. This is a book that looks at a woman who has a sudden severe health crisis, and the kind of looking at this as how this affects her sense of self, her sense of her body, her sense of her identity, and also this, Jen sort of put it as like this introduction almost into the world of the unwell, from someone that was previously able-bodied. It reads very fast, it's memoir, it reads very fast, I feel, and there is a lot of like fairly graphic medical experiences in here, so if you're someone that's had difficulty with trauma in medicine, then this might be potentially a little bit hard to read. If you haven't, or you are someone like me who doesn't know a lot about the world of the physical world of being unwell, I found this very easy to access and to put myself within. I'm not going to talk about it too much in this video because I think I'm going to make another video talking about it, but I feel as though, as someone who is very mentally unwell from very early in my life, I was taught about this huge distinction between those that are physically unwell and those that are mentally unwell, and I don't mean taught by like school or family, I mean like by healthcare professionals, and sometimes I struggle thinking about physical illness or long-term physical illness, because when I was younger it was always placed as they're really ill, they're the people that need sympathy, and you don't, like, you need to go away, you're eating their resources. So sometimes I feel a little bit like, I'll talk about it more, but sometimes I feel a little bit like ashamed almost because of that dichotomy, and I find it hard to engage in stories like this because I feel like this is what the A&E nurses were trying to tell me when I was very unwell. So there's some personal feelings that go on in terms of reading more in depth about people with like long-term or very serious physical illness for me, but that's for another day. Okay, and the next one I have is another non-fiction, that is Oak Flat. I spoke about this a little bit recently, I can't remember which video it was in, but this is a kind of graphic non-fiction. So you have some pages that have pictures on it, some pages that have just a little bit of text. There's some more with some more pictures, and then they do have some which are like more text than anything else. It's gorgeous, this book, like the whole book is gorgeous, but let me just show you under its dust jacket, it's being resistant. Yeah, so that's the book under the dust jacket, and this is the inside papers. It is a book about a physical location called Oak Flat, which is being sought out for mining. However, the location isn't like not neutral, not like many locations are, but this is an intensely important spiritual location for the Apache people. So we go through the story listening to the lore and understanding about what this place is, and how it's affecting people who live there today and what that fight looks like. I love this. I've just had a ladybird land on my head. You probably won't be able to see her. It's like a harlequin one. She's there. Yeah, I really enjoyed Oak Flat. I have since read Radioactive, like literally yesterday. I didn't enjoy it as much, but I still liked it. But I think this one is really just the drawings and the placemaking feels like it matters more in the story than maybe it did in Radioactive. But if you haven't read any of hers, I would definitely recommend Oak Flat. I think we're just running through what's left of non-fiction now. The next one I have is Craft in the Real World by Matthew Salsles. This book, very interesting in terms of topic and my experience with it and what your experience with it might be, but it looks at the ways in which sort of societal prejudices feed into the way that we approach writing and writing workshops, and talks about how to like decolonialise the craft of writing, and some of it is talking about what that looks like in terms of how those aspects of society feed into a writing group. But a good portion of this book is exercises and workshop ideas for people who are running writing. So like this whole section of the book here is like resource. I really enjoyed this. I actually started working on something again after a really long time of leaving it alone. And I kind of started over because there wasn't much of it. But I found it quite inspiring to be thinking about the things in here, and also I found that the exercises are really good. We've now got helicopters and strimmers, so I might just pause for a second. Yeah, so I would say with Craft in the Real World, it's definitely worth reading. Like, even if you're not a writer, if you're just someone who's interested in the process of writing, I found this one really enjoyable, and it gives really nice exercises at the end. So if you're someone that has written, maybe hasn't done it in a while like me, you might really enjoy like playing around with some of the concepts and prompts and things. Yeah, so that is Craft in the Real World. Then the last one I have for non-fiction is Between Light and Storm by Esther Wolfston. This is a book looking at how humans relate to animals. It's quite heavy on the crows at the beginning, just FYI. She's like very into birds, and there's a lot of like how we interact with birds at the beginning, and it nearly put me off because I'd expected it to be a wider book, and I thought, oh, is it just about birds? Like, I know there's a bird on the cover, maybe I didn't read it all, like the background stuff, but it does go into more about our general relationship with animals in terms of animal testing, eating animals, clothing ourselves with animals, and looking really at the kind of relationships that humans have made and the prioritisation of species and why that is, and psychologically how that impacts how we consider our duties in relation to animals that live within our environment. If you're interested in that kind of topic, I think you just have to get past the first couple chapters that are so bird heavy. He's got a very loud strimmer. I can't even see him, he's that far away. I'm hoping you'll still be able to hear me. I'm going to come in a little bit. So back to fiction again. The next one I have is The Employees by Olga Ravin. Now I saw, who did I see talking about? It was CJ Reeds. I saw CJ Reeds talking about rating book covers, and she didn't like this one. She was like, gives her nothing. I love this cover. Like, I would go to bat for this cover. I believe in this cover. I feel like the aspects of the book are on this cover in terms of like, I could like go into why I love it, but I feel like the kind of corporate aspect of it and this like blank space that's then intruded on by this object, and it relates to the content of the book with the objects within the book, and the way that it's formatted, it looks like the beginning of a report. Like I could see someone starting that with like The Employees and then the title of what they're trying to get at, and this being down here is like how you put the author on your title page of business reports. So I really liked this cover, and it just appealed to me very deeply. Like when I saw it, I was like, oh, that's smart. So just in terms of like what this is about, this is probably my favourite for the Man Booker, the Booker International this year. I would go to bat for this. I loved At Night All Blood is Black, and it totally deserved its place, like no question, but this is probably my personal favourite. This looks at a spaceship which is kind of orbiting around this planet, which maybe they thought was habitable, maybe they don't, and looks at how something is going wrong with their staff. And maybe the reason I enjoy this so much is because I'm HR, like my job is in HR, and so any books that like deal with like psychological issues or like questions about humanity through the workplace, I'm like, ooh. But this looks at what is happening through essentially witness statements that get taken by the employees, who are they're not noted as like whether they're the same people or whether some of them are common, but they're just noted in terms of the statement numbers. And we follow this personal drama about corporatization, our place within the work, the AI technology that's coming into the workplace, our humanity, our role in capitalism and how we react to that, how we respond to that. I've now got a small engined plane, and I adored this. I thought this was so clever. I read loads of it out to Tom. If I'd had a pen with me, this would be an underlined book, and this is definitely one I want to reread, and I don't reread an awful lot of books. Then the next one, hopefully you can hear me. Then lots of flights today. Then the next one I have is The Border of Paradise by Esme Wujing Wang. And this felt like, how would I describe it? It felt like a kind of distilled version of the kind of literary fiction that I enjoy, but it is very depressing, and actually I started it a couple times and I wasn't in as happy enough mental space to read it as I needed to be. One of our characters, just for content about why that was difficult, is like actively suicidal throughout the book and engages in suicidal ideation in the way that they're talking about their life, and also attempt suicide on a number of occasions. So this is sort of the husband of the pair. It's also talking about race and about exotification and assumptions made about Asian women. So the main character is, well, it's hard to tell because it's kind of one of those literary fiction where it starts at the beginning of their life and you go the whole way through, like generational type stuff. But the main character is essentially a very privileged white guy who inherited a lot of money after his dad's death in the Newark piano business, and he has a life that is full of this clear like issues with depression or with suicide in whatever way that kind of comes to him. There's parts where he feels almost psychotic, and knowing, you know, Esme Wujing Wang's other works, I wonder whether that is sort of a twinned diagnosis. But he kind of gets into this rut in his life and decides he'll feel better if he like goes physically away. He meets up with this woman who is working almost as like a brothel recruiter and takes her back to America. And his expectations of who she is, and her expectations of who she is, and her telling her own story of who she is just almost painful in how racist it is. I won't go too much more into the plot than that. There is like lots of other aspects that fall in, but because it's that kind of story-based, person-based, people-based thing, if I say too much, I think I'll probably turn it into something that isn't so fun to explore. But I would say that there's obviously content warnings in here for like potentially some compelled sex work. There's racism, there's incest, suicide, depression, self-harm. So it is quite a big book in terms of topics, but I really enjoyed it. Really glad that I read this one. It's kind of exactly what I want in terms of the ability to tell that long story and include so much without it being an overwhelmingly huge book. So yeah, that was The Border of Paradise. Really enjoyed. Next one I really liked as well. We're on a roll. This is In Delicacy by Amina Kane. I nearly didn't get this one. I did this for a challenge. The video will be up soon. And I found it very hard to recommend. I actually feel like this book is maybe floating around like as like an undercurrent, but maybe isn't being like shouted about loads. But essentially this looks at a woman from some unnamed point in history. We kind of know that it's a historical fiction, who's working in a gallery as a cleaner and thinks about what her life might be like if she was on the other side of this social sphere. The thing that makes this so interesting is that whilst the book feels very old, it also feels just like it's happening now. Like, I found it really difficult, this kind of, not difficult in a bad way, but difficult cognitively, between this setting which clearly had historical markers and the emotion and the themes which connected directly to today. It's very short, but one of the things I liked about it so much is each chapter is tiny. I'm talking like 2 pages at most, and the language is so exact. Like, every single word that she's chosen is exactly in the right place, exactly where it should be. It feels quite ordered without the telling of the story feeling stilted, and the kind of themes around like positioning yourself within the world, or understanding yourself or yourself in different social scenarios, or how to run away from things you don't want and whether you can. It's very, very good. Like, when I finished this book, I found it quite difficult to kind of put my thoughts together in the other video I was filming, and I think I still struggle with it now, but I can definitely recommend it. So an odd little book, but it's stuck with me and still kind of confuses me when I think now. So that's In Delicacy. Then the next one I have is Sorrowland by River Solomon. And I've seen mixed reviews on this one, and I get why. Like, we follow a person. I would say they are like gender fluid or gender non-binary. It's not like specifically noted, but I would say like the vast majority of characters in this book are, which is really interesting. And the author is also like a non-binary person. And they have escaped a cult, I would say, called Canaanland, which was built to be a place outside of racism and a place to celebrate blackness. But it's a cult, so it also has negative aspects. And they run into the woods, and the very first scene is them birthing a child in these woods. There is a lot of odd, magical, fantasy-esque elements going in on this too, and it's kind of a hard book to classify. Without saying like too much about the plot, I would just say there's a lot going on. It read very pacily. It read more like what I consider, I know that's a generalisation, but I consider more genre fiction pace. But it was talking about lots of different aspects, and I don't know, like in classifying it, that it is specifically noted as like genre fiction or just standard fiction. I did like it. I can't stop thinking about the things in the book, but I don't know, it unsettled me, I suppose. And not even unsettled as in the discussions on race and the impact of whiteness, but like the character very much unsettled me, but I understand why. The way it was told was just, yeah. You might have to read it. I don't know that I can explain too much without too many spoilers. So that's Sorrowland by River Solomon. Then the next one I read was another like similar book, and I actually read these too close together, I think. But this was Blue Ticket by Sophie McIntosh. This world is based around the concept that young girls on their first period go to a doctor who determines whether they get a blue ticket or a white ticket. The white ticket women will go on to have babies, and the blue ticket women will be free, like off you go. Again, similar themes, so I'm trying not to spoil either of them because they are kind of more like read through them to find out what happens to the characters than something like The Border of Paradise. But essentially we're looking at like the maiden, like the whore, the mother roles of women within this society. I would say I did like this. I think Sorrowland will stick with me more, but I probably had more like enjoyment of the story whilst reading Blue Ticket, and I think that's maybe because it was a little bit less challenging in terms of like the types of things that were in the content, but it were kind of I definitely recommend this as like a book to take on holiday with you, or like a book if you're going, you know, you've got to go like sit somewhere for a long time. I think it's very well written. I also think that you can like dive into this story fairly well and come out better off. I preferred it to The Water Cure, though I can't really say why. I read The Water Cure in Turkey and it sticks in my head a lot. But yeah, that's Blue Ticket. It is exploring just one concept, and maybe that's why it sticks out like less. It'll stay with me less time than Sorrowland, but it's not that I didn't enjoy it. I did. I've still got loads to go. My camera battery's flashing, so I might have to change to my phone. So next I have Braised Pork by Anne Yu, and this one I've seen like going around a bit more. I didn't really see that much of it when it first came out, but this looks at a woman who finds her husband dead in a bathtub with a mysterious drawing curled up next to his body of a fish with the head of a man. This is a magical book. This is a book which is it's talking about a very quiet kind of real life story mixed with a quite threatening otherworldly aura. I think it feels a little bit folk tale mixed with literary fiction. That's really how I describe it. I don't want to say too much because again, I was surprised by this book. I thought we were going one direction, we went another way. So there's quite a few of those in this pile. But if you're kind of interested in determining the mystery of this man's death and this drawing, if that's interesting enough to you, I think you will enjoy it. And I really like the characters. I felt like the characters were well built. We're still flashing. We've done 25 minutes of this. The next one I read was Rachel Cusk's Second Place. This is a story about a woman who's living in a like fairly chill sort of life with her partner and her daughter, who has had a correspondence with an artist after she saw a painting that he had taken and she loved it. Through the story, he then arrives at their house and just causes chaos, like breaking her sense of self, her sense of relationships, her self-worth, and we're really looking about how this particular kind of male presence, which is very different from her husband's partners, I don't know, I can't remember if they're married, but it's very different from the man that she's like let into her life as a lover. How his masculinity upsets the order of the life that she's provided and the way that it changes how she imagines she would react to this kind of masculinity. I did like it. I feel like I've maybe read other Rachel Cusks I preferred more, but it's not to say that I didn't enjoy this one. I think her ability to look at an idea within the sense of place and the way that she writes is very compelling. So if you are a Rachel Cusk fan, I think you'll enjoy it anyway. If not, it depends on whether or not that particular story is of interest to you, because I do think they're quite limited in what she explores. Then next I have Little Scratch by Rebecca Watson. I liked but didn't love this one, and I think the more time that's gone on since I finished it, the less I've maybe loved it. This is a story about a woman, like a very millennial woman, working in a bit of a rubbish job, who is coming to terms with the fact that she's been sexually assaulted, and now motorbikes. And it's told in a very fragmented way. Like the book, when you read it, you have to kind of go with it. Like it's got a lot of kind of clatter and background noise to the way that it's written, which is very clever. It does put you in that story in a way that is very interesting. But I really struggled to empathise with her. Like I really struggled to connect to the character, not empathise with her as in like why is it bad, but to really get into her head. It's a very short period of time. I think it's from when she wakes up in the morning to when she goes to sleep as well, and perhaps that's part of it. And even though we were so close to her head, like we basically were in this story within her mind, I struggled to find her amongst all the noise. And I don't know whether that was intentional or not, but I think I liked it when I finished it, and then further on I felt like I needed to connect with her more than I did. I felt like maybe the noise around her stopped me from channeling in on what we were trying to talk about in terms of that particular character. Okay, I've had to switch to my phone, but hopefully that's okay. So the next one I have on the list is Milk, Blood, Heat by Dantel W. Montis. This is a collection of short stories, and they are relentlessly dark. Definitely there's like aspects of like horribleness and everything that is there, but I really, really enjoyed the process of reading these, but I've forgotten a lot of the individual stories since I read them. I think part of the problem for me is I read short stories too fast. I feel like I need more gap between them. But they're kind of, I would say, about girlhood and about the kind of aspect of childhood and the turning of yourself from a girl into a woman, the markers of that, the violence that sometimes accompanies that, but in terms of actually telling you like what each individual story is about, I'm struggling to do that. It has been a little while since I read this at the very like day one of the month, and so it's nearly like 6 weeks later now, but still I really liked it and I really want to recommend it better, but I just can't remember enough of them. But I think that's not the fault of the collection. In fact, when I finished it, I thought I enjoyed every single story in the collection. So it's just my poor memory. It's not me not recommending this. I did really like this. Then next I have The Removed by Brendan Hobson. This was another one I read earlier on in the month. We look at a family of like a native family who have lost their son through police violence when he was very young. And we look at kind of the impact of that onwards, the impact that, you know, that happens to that other sibling, things about drug use, and the way that the father who has Alzheimer's is coping with the loss of these memories of the people around him too, and the kind of loneliness that comes in for the mother in this loss. And in a way, this is a way of exploring like many different strands and experiences within one aspect of like one family. Like we kind of gather together lots of different aspects and view them from different lenses within the family. I felt like this was something I'm very glad that I've read. One aspect of the story I thought was particularly clever was the introduction of a foster child, and how the dynamic of sort of a returned child, though it's not their child, impacted them, so that you could kind of see what their life might have been like. Yeah, I've waited a long time to read this one. I ordered it last year, and there was some issues with getting it to me for some reason. But I'm really glad that I have read it. I think lots of people have already read this one because it came out a while ago and it just literally took weeks to get to me. If you haven't yet, I think this is one of my favourite things I've read about like Native Americans. I liked Oak Flat a lot too. I would say I've read 2 which were really good, whereas there's not been as many other stories I've read that have stuck with me as much. Yeah, so that is The Removed. Just going off on my own head trying to think about more aspects of the story. Then the next one I have is The Lying Life of Adults by Elena Ferrante. This is my first Elena Ferrante, and and I had a few comments saying like odd one to start with, which I kind of get, but I'm glad I did, because I think the concept of starting with a multi-part book series for someone that I had like trepidation about was just never going to happen. This story is about a girl who is coming into a kind of adolescence, finding her kind of personal rebellion from those teenage years in introducing herself to the kind of black sheep of the family, her aunt, who's called Victoria, and ingratiating herself with this other forbidden portion of her family as she tries to understand herself. We essentially are looking at a story of like what adolescence is and the feelings and the journey that people go on to realise themselves and their own kind of adolescence and their own growing up. I did think the book was too long, would be what I would say. I probably like really liked it by the time we got to probably about 250 pages, and then I felt like it lost its place. Like it almost felt like it like jumped, and then I was like, oh no, like it just felt like something was missing at around like the last quarter of the book to draw me to the end, which was a real shame. But I can say that I really enjoyed her characterization and her writing style, so I think I would definitely read more Elena Ferrante. I don't think it's put me off, but I maybe didn't like, I wasn't blown away, but I think that's okay. I think it's just like broken the seal of I can't read her because I'm too intimidated, which is what I wanted from this book. So that is The Lying Life of Adults. This one I have is An Inventory of Losses by Judith Slansky. This one I actually really didn't like. This was one of the Booker International picks. It's not like I hated it, but we are looking at a number of different things, places, people, locations which did once exist and now don't exist. I just didn't get on with how she was telling the stories. It felt like non-fiction, but it felt a bit textbooky. I didn't feel like there was as much life in the things that were lost to make me care enough about them. Like some of them I did, others I was like, oh, okay, we'll read through this one. And I think maybe there were so many different physical locations that I found that a little dull. I didn't love it, I've got to be honest, I didn't love this one. This is probably like, of all the books I've read, the one I would say like probably skip. It just didn't chime with me. To be fair, I haven't heard that many people saying they like adored this one, so maybe I'm not the last one out, but it is a nice cover. Isn't that a pretty cover? So that's positive. And then we're on the last book finally, which is When We Cease to Understand the World. I also really enjoyed this. I did really like this. This book is like fiction, non-fiction, looking at different aspects of the lives of famous physicists for the whole, which was amazing. I did physics at uni for half of it, if you didn't know, and I found this just really good fun. It was like all of the gossipy like detail of the life, and I think it is hard to know what is fiction and what's not. Only because I studied physics for a couple of years at uni did I know like which of the aspects of the physics was true, because you know you use it when you're at uni. But I think for me, my interpretation is the fiction comes in terms of emoting for those people about what that might have felt like, and the letters, I'm not sure whether they all exist. I was never like super into reading about the lives of physicists, I just was interested in their work. There are a couple of mathematicians in here as well, but this is just so well done, like so well formed. I felt like it was incredibly like engaging. Don't let it put you off the fact it's about physics. I don't think it's like you have to be interested in physics to be interested in this book. It is just talking about like the ways in which human beings are like developing ideas and the fact that they're still people, and like how they interrelate with one another. I just really like this one. So that is everything. There were lots of books. I actually, when I took the thumbnail, I couldn't hold them all, and you still see me, so I had to do like a little scenic one. But hopefully you've enjoyed. I feel like the number of books isn't maybe the highest I've ever read, but the hardback quantity was pretty high compared to paperbacks. Yeah, I'll see you guys soon in my next video, and look after yourselves until then. As always, let me know in the comments down below if there's any of these that I've interested you in, or anything that you agree with or disagree with. I always really like chatting to you, and I'll see you again soon in my next one. Bye!